This is a demo of the Payment Journal import add-on for Dynamics 365 Business Central by Lighthouse Experts Group. The Payment Journal import allows you to do a bulk import of payments and applications into Business Central from a regular Excel file, and there's no need to follow a template. You decide what fields you want to import, you decide what order you want those fields, and the import will take care of getting all the values into the right places in Business Central. The import will also perform all the necessary validations to make sure that any required fields have been entered, all the codes are valid, all the dimension values exist, and so on. So let me start by showing you how to set up the Excel file with your payments, and then we'll run the import to see how the journal lines get created in the system. So if you don't have it already, the first step is to get the list of available fields, and you can get that from our website, which is www.lighthouseexperts.com. And on our website, if you scroll down to the area where it says Business Central Apps, you can click on the button for Payment Journal Import. And that'll take you to a page with some instructions and more information related to everything I'm going to show you today. But for now, the only thing we need is the list of available fields, which is right here. So when you click on that, it'll take you to a shared Google folder. And you don't need a Google account to be able to access this. All you need to do is hit the download button. And then once the file is downloaded, we'll just go ahead and open it. Okay, so you'll see some instructions here at the top, but the important thing to notice is the field name column, which is column A, and the fact that some of these fields are in red, which just means that they're required. So the first column in this file will have all the available field names from the payment journal that you can use in your import. The second column tells you whether that field is required or not, and the third column is the data type. So you can have different data types. If it's an option data type, for example, it'll tell you in the notes field what are all the different available values for that field separated by a slash. So in this case, for document type, you could have either payment or application. For account type, it could be GL account, customer, vendor, bank account, and so on. When it's a date or a decimal, those are pretty straightforward. When it's a code or a text field, it'll tell you between brackets what is the maximum amount of characters you can have for that field. So for example, this is just saying that document number is a 20 character maximum code field. And for all the other fields, the notes column will just give you a little bit more information as to what's the purpose of that field and what it does in Business Central. And of course, you can also find more information in the Business Central help pages. So let's go ahead and start filling in our import file. To do this, I'll create a brand new file and I'll copy and paste all of my required fields from here. And so this is the bare minimum in terms of what columns I need in any template I'm going to create for this import. So I'll go through these fields one by one just to explain how they work. For batch name, that's just the payment journal batch name from your Business Central environment. So these could be different for you. In my case, I am using one called General. But of course, each environment will have their own different batch names. Posting date, you could use whatever date you want to post the payment as of. So I'll just use today's date. Document type could be payment or application, and I'll go over these a little bit later in terms of when to use one versus the other. But for now, I'll just say that you want to keep them together because these application lines basically are going to define the invoices that you want to apply this payment to. So you'll have a payment line and one or more application lines, or you could even have no application lines in certain cases. So I'll go over those different scenarios a little bit later on. Now, in addition to these, there's a couple of fields that I may like to add personally. So, one of them is description. I also want to add the amount. So amount. You could have maybe a payment reference and so on. The only thing to be careful here is if you're typing the header names manually like I am, you just want to make sure that they match exactly what's in the field list over here. Because if you mistype one of these header lines, you'll get an error message because the import won't be able to recognize which field you're referring to. So just be careful if you're typing these in manually. Uh, Best thing to do is just to copy paste similar to what I did with these. Um, Now, account type and account number are typically the vendor that you're paying. So this would typically be vendor, and then this would typically be your vendor number. Again, this is just a vendor number that I have in my demo environment. These will be different in yours, most likely. Same with balancing account type and balancing account number. These will typically be bank account and then the actual bank account code that you're paying from. Now, in terms of dimensions, there's a list of dimensions down here going from shortcut dimension 1 to 8. I'll copy these first two, and I'll hop back into Business Central just to show you where those come from. So if you open up your general ledger setup, this is where you would specify your global and shortcut dimensions. So in my case, in this demo environment, I actually have four shortcut dimensions. These are the names of the dimensions. And you can either copy paste these in just like I did, or you can actually use the codes that are in your general ledger setup. So for example, if I want to use shortcut dimension 1 and 2, I can enter department in here. It doesn't have to be capitalized. It could be like this. It could be any capitalization you want, as long as it's exactly the same as the code that you have in your general ledger setup, it'll be able to determine which dimension you're referring to. So in this case, customer group, I can type it in like this. And so I've pre-filled a couple of sample files just in the interest of time. But this is basically how you would start building your import file for the first time. Now, I'll show you a couple of sample files that I've created ahead of time. Um, One of them you'll see doesn't have any applications, and the second one does have applications. So this is where I'm going to kind of describe how these different files work. So the fields are exactly the same as what we looked at before. I have my batch name, posting date, document type of payment, a document number, which is optional, the vendor that I'm paying. Over here to the right, I have the bank account that I'm paying from. And there's a couple of important fields, which is applies to doc type and applies to doc number. So if you're familiar with these from the payment journal and entering a payment journal manually, this works exactly the same way on a payment line. So within Business Central, you can create a payment line. There's really three types of payment lines that you can create, right? So one of them is a payment line with no applications. So meaning that I'm creating a payment to this vendor for a certain amount. I can post this payment, but it's not really applied to any invoice until I go into my vendor ledger entries and do that application later on. So I can still post a payment to this vendor. It'll show up in vendor ledger entries as open, and then I would just have to apply that payment to some invoice within the vendor ledger entries page. Now, the second type of payment is a payment that applies to one invoice. And when you have that scenario, you can actually put the invoice that it applies to right on the same payment line. And this is true for the import file as well as Business Central. So you would enter your payment line just like you would in the first example, except that now you would set applies to doc type equals invoice, and you would actually choose the posted invoice number that you want to apply this payment to. And so on this line, the first line and the third line, this is the same type of application. So meaning that once this payment posts, it'll actually automatically apply that amount to this invoice. And so you would use this if basically you have only one invoice from a vendor and you're paying off that invoice. And so you wouldn't need to apply the payment to any other invoices, just to the one. You could put that invoice right on this line. Now, the third scenario is a little more complicated. It's when you have a payment that applies to multiple invoices. And so for this, I've created a separate file where I have a payment line and then multiple application lines. So this is specifically to handle the scenario where you have a payment that applies to multiple invoices for the same vendor. And when you post that payment, you want to make sure you apply that. You want to make sure the system applies that to all those open invoices. So the way to specify this in the import file is a little different than in Business Central. In Business Central, what you would do, and I'll just hop back over to the payment journal. When you create that payment line, there's actually a button called Apply Entries. So you could create your payment line, hit Apply Entries. All the open invoices for that vendor will show up, and then you would have to basically select them one by one to tell the system, hey, when you post this payment line, apply this payment to all these invoices that I've selected in this Apply Entries page. For the import, we're going to do all this in Excel. And so this document type of application actually doesn't exist within Business Central. So if I actually look for a document type of application, you're not going to find it here. The reason it exists in the import is that you need to have some way to tell the import what invoices you want to apply your payments to. And so this is the way to do that. So another thing to notice is that every payment line and applications that go with that payment are grouped together. So the reason for that is that when you create a payment line and you have multiple invoices you want to apply that payment to, they just have to go below that payment. Because what's happening is that the import is going to process these lines one by one. And so when it notices that, hey, this is a new payment line, okay, it's going to create that payment line. This is a different payment line. And then when it sees application lines underneath that, it's going to know to apply this payment to however many application lines you have below that. And you'll also notice that for the application lines, you don't need to fill out all the same information as what's in the payment line. You can if you want to, but the bare minimum are the required fields that we looked at earlier. So batch name, posting date, document type, account number, balancing account type, and balancing account number. And in the case of an application line, you also need to tell the import what is the doc type and document number of the invoice that you're applying the payment to. So these become required in the case of an application line. And so essentially, when you have these payment lines set up, you would enter your payment line, and then let's say in this case, we have two invoices that I want to apply that payment to. I would set up the application lines the same way as the payment line with just the bare minimum of the required fields that I need, as well as applies to doc type equals invoice and applies to document number would be the posted invoice number that you want to apply this payment to. So in my example, I have a payment line for vendor number 30,000, and I have two invoices that I want to apply this payment to, and these are the invoice numbers. In this case, I have a payment line that only applies to one invoice. So I don't need any application lines underneath, and that's why there are none. It's just specified in here that this amount is going to be applied to this invoice, but only that one invoice. And then in this case, I have a third payment line that has two invoices that I want to apply it to underneath. So again, just want to mention that this is just my personal template that I've created. It's just a sample, but each individual user will decide which fields are relevant to them, which ones they want to use in their import, and they can choose the ordering of the fields in their files. So for example, if I don't like this description field over here, I can move it over here. If I don't like this comment field over here, I can put it over here. There's really no importance to the ordering of the fields. The import will dynamically adjust to whatever field ordering you have in your template or in your import file. That means that different users can use different layouts, or the same user can actually maintain different templates if they want to. This allows you to focus on the fields that are relevant to you in your import file without worrying about all the additional fields on the Business Central application. And if there's a custom field or some other non-standard field you'd like to use in your import, just let us know and we can add it to the import template so that you can use them as available fields, just like you could with any of the regular fields that we've seen today. And so now that we have our import files filled in, let's run the import in Business Central. So the first thing I'll do is I'll save this file and then I'll close out of it. And then when we hop back into Business Central, we can just use the magnifying glass to search for the payment journal import. and I'll run that. And then it'll ask you to select an Excel file. So I'll just do that with the ellipsis button, click on browse, and I'll just select the second file we had with all the applications since that's a little bit more complicated than the other one. And once I've selected the file, I'll just hit OK, and it'll go through and import the lines. Now, I know that was really quick, but I hope you were able to see that the import will show you a progress, and it'll show you the actual line number being imported one by one, so you can track the progress of your file. Once it's done, it'll say the import was successful and the number of lines that it imported. So these 7 lines just correspond to the same lines that we created in our import file. I'll hit OK. And now in the payment journal, we could see here are all the payment lines that I've created. There's really only 3 payment lines in here. The other 4 lines were applications. And so let me go through these one by one, and I'll show you how the applications were done. So for the second line, I'm not sure if you remember, this was the only payment line that didn't have any application lines below it. And that's because we had one specific invoice that was that needed the payment applied to it. So we specified that invoice directly on the payment line, and we didn't need to create any application lines for this one. For the other 2 lines, we actually have applications to more than one invoice. So the way the system handles that is it goes into the apply entries page and it basically does it for you. So essentially it'll apply your payment to the 2 invoices that you had selected. Now, obviously, if you pick an invoice number that's not for this vendor or doesn't correspond to this payment at all, you'll get an error message. But assuming that you've selected the correct document numbers and so on, it'll actually perform these applications for you in the background. So that's the power of using this import, is that you can actually not only import the payment lines, but you're also importing all the applications, and it's all happening at once in the background. Same thing with the third line. We could go in here and see the 2 documents that I've applied this payment to. And that's about it. So reviewing all the data, everything looks good. I have my dimensions, my comments, and everything else in here. I can just literally go ahead and post this as is, assuming everything looks good. So this tool can be useful for organizations who enter multiple payments into Business Central, because now you can create multiple payments in a few seconds versus a few hours, and you can use Excel to make your life easier. And if there's any additional functionality that you need for your business that aren't part of the base payment journal import, let us know and we can customize the add-on to work with any of your specific business requirements. And if you'd like to see a live demo or ask any additional questions, feel free to reach out to us at info@lighthouseexperts.com.